Are we ready?
We're ready, but there's no one on yet.
Okay, then we'll wait.
Okay, we have Alex now has joined as the first attendee. Dan, you can open up on your screen something called participants.
Let's get me familiar with that stuff when people aren't here. Because I don't want to mess up in front of people.
Well, we're using my screen, so you can't mess anything up. No one's going to see you.
So what do you want me to do?
Just click on the button that says participants.
It says there's 4. Oh, that tells us, okay. Okay,
And then go to attendees.
okay.
And now you see who's in. It's a very useful function. You can see people coming and going. Right now we've got Alex, so we may have a small audience today.
Well, we'll see. We're supposed to, there are 18 people signed up. Unless Alex just signed up 18 times, trying to make us feel good. We'll give it to about 6 or 7 after and make a decision.
For those of you who have just joined the webinar this afternoon, we're just giving folks a couple more minutes before we start the presentation.
Okay, Keith, why don't we get going? Otherwise, we won't be able to conclude in time.
Absolutely. Why don't you lead off, Dan?
Okay. Hi, this is Dan Morris speaking, and I'd like to welcome you all to our MCT webinar on disruption. Now, just as a note, we don't read the slides. We kind of talk about the topics. So we provide a copy of the slides for you to download. And hopefully you can use them to take notes and to, in the long term, use them as reference material. Now, the webinar, just as all of our webinars, is broken into two sections. One that deals with a presentation of concepts of ideas, and then the second part that deals with a general discussion of those concepts and ideas. Okay. Slide, please. Now, in our experience, what we've seen is that a lot of companies experience disruptions, and one common thing they all have in common is that they're disruptive. They change the way the company operates. Now, every company has a choice when it comes to looking at how they respond to what's going on in the world. And that's they can either prepare for the disruption or they can scramble to react to it. And unfortunately, most of the time we're in a situation, at least in our clients, we found that they're really not ready. They have a couple of different types of plans that we'll talk about in a couple minutes, but they're really not prepared for the disruption. And the fact is, the less you are prepared for it, the greater the impact is on your company. Next slide, please. Now, today we're going to look at 4 major topics. And we'll look at how those topics then really can affect what's going on. And the first thing that we need to do is to look at, if in fact we're right and the next disruption is coming, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. We have another slide on that. How do we prepare for it? What do we need to do to be ready for the next COVID or the next major disruption that comes down the pike? We know that in any move from experience, we know that any move to, whether it's a continuity plan or a disaster recovery plan, starts off with panic. And we needed a way to control that and make sure that it's really doesn't affect the response. So we also found out that once you come in, you're now operating in response mode, and that can be a few weeks to a few months, or in this case, a year. So now, when you're doing that, you have new rules, you have new procedures, you have new processes. How do you then recover from that? Because what you put in place is a lot of workarounds and a lot of temporary activities that are changing constantly. Slide. So before we get into the presentation, we'll just, for those who are new to us, MCT is a training company that's focused on business transformation. We were started by executive consultants who are recognized experts in the business transformation industry. Our goal is to give people the skills to get noticed, to understand the right way to perform large-scale business transformation and improvement projects, and for themselves, how they can become recognized experts. Right now, one of the problems in companies is that a lot of people dealing in improvement, once you get beyond Six Sigma and fixing problems, making things a little more efficient on that micro level, when you get to large scale things that deal with departments, divisions, or the entire companies, people really aren't trained to do that. And the result of that is about a 70% failure rate to deliver on the expectations that are set. So becoming an expert then makes you the go-to person that drives successful improvement and is a great help in everything from being placed on better projects to promotions. Now, and the last thing on that I'd like to talk about briefly is I'd like to encourage you all to visit our website, take a free course or two, download a paper or an article from our library, and start getting to know us a little bit, because we have a lot of resources that are free that can really be helpful to you. Now, the presenters are myself, Dan Morris, and Keith Loost. And a little bit about myself is I have 30 years of business transformation experience. I've been the North American Practice Director for business transformation at several international consulting firms, the author of 5 books and over 70 papers. I've spoken at multiple conferences. Keith has 25 years of experience, and he's led Motorola University. So he's kind of our expert on education. He's been an executive consultant at Andersen and EY, Vice President of Transformation at Prudential. He's the author of multiple books and papers, and he's also a speaker at multiple conferences. Okay, slide, Keith. Okay. Now, the first thing that I would ask, and I assume that you all do too, is, okay, what do we mean by disruption? What's a disruptive event? Well, we define disruption events as any occurrence that stops or impacts the business operation for an extended period. And these are occurrences that seriously damage the company and its ability to operate normally. And it's an event that requires the company to undergo massive change. And I think that's significant. And we can see that in COVID. It's where we started to move to work at home. It's where we started to move to a lot of different ways to build systems and to support the work environment. Now, one of the things that I don't think a lot of people realize is that disruption happens constantly with varying impacts, but we have global events, regional, local, and then we have company-specific events, like we have fires, floods, those types of things. But one of the things that is very important that a lot of people don't realize or recognize is their IT-related events, where systems implementations just really don't go right. The systems that are built really don't work the way that you want them to. And when you move to them and it stops working and your business change, you now are in the disruptive event. But the question that everybody really needs to look at in these things, because they happen. I mean, it doesn't make a company good or bad, they happen. And so how ready is an organization at either the company level, the department level, or any place in between? How ready are they to continue their operations if we have a problem? And we have a history of having problems. Can we have the next slide, please? What we see here is that these are major problems, and they happened continuously for the last 60 years or so. And these are just the major ones. There are probably twice as many minor ones that have happened. But some of them are like the Asian flu, SARS, are health related, and now COVID. Fortunately, in the past, they haven't been as impactful as COVID has been, but COVID's not the first one. We also have had big changes from natural events, and we'll say man-made events like Chernobyl. And all of these things, if you look at them and you consider how businesses change and how fast they change, the cumulative impact of all of these little changes that have taken place, and sometimes big changes, but taken place over time in the company, have destroyed the internal fabrics of the operation. They don't work the way they're supposed to, and they don't work the way that people think they do. And I've been involved in over 100 projects, from improvements to full transformations. And you can see the impact over time as you start to understand how those operations work. So disruptions really are an important type of activity that companies haven't really paid attention to, but need to. Next slide, please. Okay. So in the past, companies have created business continuity plans and they've created disaster recovery plans. The problem is they're independent of one another typically. So when an event happens, like a disruption happens, people start to respond without coordination. One of the things with a disruption plan is it pulls in the continuity plan and the disaster recovery plan and melds them together so that you have an organized response to it. And people in both the business community and the IT community understand what they're supposed to do. They understand how they work together. And beyond that, now in the operation, when they move to these new operations, the operations don't function well. And the reason they don't function well is there's a lot of workarounds, the systems don't fit anymore, and they're trying to force this stuff all together. The next thing that you then need to do, especially if this is going to be more than a couple of weeks of duration, is to improve the operation. And as we start to shift to these models, performance improvement becomes important. Overall operations improvement becomes important. So that as we stay in these environments, especially like now with COVID for a year, we start to have an operation environment that becomes better and better, and we learn more. But now we have to, and we'll talk about this later, shift to recovery. And how do we shift to what we'll define as a new normal? Because we're never going back. We can't go back. Physically and system-wise operation, you cannot return to the way things were. So how do we get to a new normal that's reasonable?
So why don't I jump in here, Dan? Pivot a little bit and talk about the realities of the business world today. We all know that the marketplace is global with a lot of local variations. It could be local with a retail establishment. It could be regional, it could be national. There's all sorts of variations. And we overlay that with the notion that technology keeps on changing and making the technology that we just implemented last year actually obsolete. Dan, I want to pause here for a moment and recognize that the one person who was listening dropped off.
Well, in that case, we're done.
Yep.
Okay, well.
Why don't we wrap this up and then why don't we jump onto a separate call, which is not open as this one is.
Okay, that sounds good to me.
All right, guys, thanks.
Okay, bye now.